The billionaire's hand was still extended across the polished bar when Evan Brooks said the word that would change everything. No, Miranda Vale had never been rejected. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not by a bartender working the graveyard shift in a downtown dive. Her perfectly manicured fingers hung in the air between them, her invitation to dinner dissolving into stunned silence. Around them, the bar continued its late-night rhythm, glasses clinking, conversations murmuring. But in that moment, the world narrowed to two people and one impossible word. Miranda's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Wounded pride mixed with sudden burning curiosity. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. "You're making a mistake." Evan met her gaze without flinching, his tired eyes holding depth she hadn't expected. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but it's mine to make." If you're watching this story unfold, drop a comment with your city below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this tale of pride, sacrifice, and unexpected love travels across the world. The amber light above the bar cast long shadows across Evan Brooks's deep brown hands as he dried the same glass for the third time. His movements were automatic after 7 years of muscle memory. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, that dead hour when the serious drinkers had gone home and only the insomniacs and the troubled remained. The Lighthouse Bar wasn't much to look at. Scuffed floors, vinyl booths with duct tape tears, a jukebox that had been playing the same 12 songs since 1997. But it was steady work, and steady work was everything. Evan was 32 years old and looked older. The kind of tired that settles into a black man's bones isn't about missed sleep. It's about years of carrying weight that never lightens. His close-cropped black curls needed a trim. His warm brown skin looked a little ashy under the bar lights. His white shirt had been pressed that morning, but now showed the wear of a full shift, and his eyes held that particular weariness of someone who'd learned early that life doesn't negotiate. "Last call went out 20 minutes ago, Mr. Chen," Evan said gently to the man hunched over the corner of the bar, his words shaped by the kind of patience that comes from repetition. "Can I call you a cab?" Chen looked up, his weathered face creasing into a grateful smile. "You're a good boy, Evan. Your mother raised you right." "She did her best," Evan replied, and the words carried more weight than Chen could know. His mother had done more than her best. She'd given everything, worked 2 jobs after his father left, put him through school until the money ran out. Now she lay in a nursing facility across town, her body betraying her one system at a time, and the medical bills arrived with the reliability of a metronome. Evan was pulling out his phone to order Chen's ride when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of October wind and a woman who didn't belong. She moved like money. That was Evan's first thought. Not the showy, nouveau riche kind that needed everyone to notice, but the deeper confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether a door would open. Her coat probably cost more than his car, though she wore it casually like it was nothing. Dark hair fell in precise waves past her shoulders, and her features were striking in that way that suggested both genetics and very expensive maintenance. But it was her eyes that caught him, sharp, assessing, and at that moment scanning the room with the focus of someone used to evaluating everything for its worth. Miranda Vale had come to the Lighthouse Bar on a whim, or what passed for a whim in her carefully structured life. Her driver had suggested a different route to avoid construction, and she'd glimpsed the neon sign through the window, an actual lighthouse rendered in blue and white tubes that flickered slightly. Something about it had seemed honest in a way her usual haunts weren't. She'd built Vale Enterprises from an inheritance of $30 million into an empire worth $3 billion in just under a decade. She was 29 years old and had been on the cover of Forbes twice. Men courted her with desperate creativity. Women wanted to be her or destroy her, sometimes both. She'd learned early that everyone wanted something, and the trick was figuring out what before they did. The bar was nearly empty. Just an old man, nursing something amber. A couple in the back booth who looked like they were having the kind of quiet argument that had been going on for years. And the bartender. He was watching her, but not the way men usually did. No double take, no straightening of posture, No sudden awareness that someone important had entered his space. He simply noted her presence the way he might note the weather, acknowledged but not changed by it. Miranda approached the bar, settling onto a stool that squeaked slightly. Up close, the bartender was younger than she'd first thought, though he had the kind of face that life had already written on. Strong jaw, straight nose, smooth, deep brown skin, and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at things. The amber light caught on the tight curls at his hairline and the knuckles of his dark hands when he moved. "What can I get you?" His voice was even, professional, with a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and not enough rest. "What do you recommend?" She was used to turning the question back, seeing how people handled the small test. "Depends on what you're looking for." He set down the glass he'd been drying, giving her his full attention in a way that was somehow both polite and impersonal. Something to celebrate, something to forget, or something to pass the time. The question surprised her with its perception. "When you put it that way, I suppose I'm passing the time. Then you want the local whiskey." He reached for a bottle with a worn label. "It's not fancy, but it's honest. Made about 50 miles from here by a guy who refuses to sell to the big distributors." He poured 2 fingers into a glass without asking if she wanted ice, somehow knowing she wouldn't. The gesture spoke of someone who paid attention, who noticed things. Miranda sipped. The whiskey was rough but good, with a warmth that spread genuine rather than affected. "You're right, it's honest." Honesty is underrated. He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. They fell into conversation the way strangers sometimes do at late hours when the world shrinks down to a small circle of light, and nothing outside it seems entirely real. She learned he worked nights so he could take morning classes. Law, though he said it like he was admitting to a secret vice. He learned she worked in business development, which was technically true, though comically understated. What surprised Miranda was how easily they talked. Usually, conversations with strangers fell into predictable patterns. People either recognized her and became performative or didn't recognize her and underestimated her. But Evan Brooks didn't do either. He listened when she talked, responded with thoughts instead of platitudes, and somehow made her forget she was a billionaire sitting in a dive bar at 3 a.m. "You married?" she asked, noting the absence of a ring, but knowing that didn't always mean anything. "No." Something flickered across his face. Not pain exactly, but the shadow of old pain. Almost was once, long time ago. "What happened?" She wanted certainty, stability. "Things I couldn't offer?" He said it without bitterness, just stating facts. "I was 23, working 2 jobs, taking care of my mother. I couldn't promise her the life she deserved, and she was smart enough to find someone who could. Do you regret it?" He considered the question seriously, wiping down the bar in slow circles. "I regret that I couldn't be what she needed. But no, I don't regret that she left. She's happy now. 2 kids, house in the suburbs, she made the right choice." The answer revealed more than he probably intended. Here was a black single dad who'd learned to accept the limits of his own life without resentment. Miranda found it oddly compelling. "What about you?" Evan asked. "Someone like you?" "I'd guess you have to beat them off with a stick." "Someone like me?" She raised an eyebrow, amused and slightly defensive. "Smart, beautiful, clearly successful," he said it matter-of-factly, the way he might comment that it was raining. "I'd bet you have plenty of options." Options aren't the same as choices. The words came out more honestly than she'd intended. "Most people who ask me out are interested in what I have, not who I am." "That sounds lonely." The simple empathy in his voice caught her off guard. Not pity, not empty sympathy, just recognition. "It is," she admitted, though I'm not supposed to say that out loud. "Successful women aren't allowed to be lonely. We're supposed to be too busy being powerful." "That's bullshit." He said it with such casual certainty that she laughed. A real laugh that surprised them both. They talked for another hour. He told her about his son, Danny, who was 7 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs and believed his father knew everything about everything. His voice softened when he spoke about the boy, carrying the kind of love that doesn't need declaration. "His mother?" Miranda asked carefully. "Couldn't handle the reality of a kid." Evan's jaw tightened slightly, the only sign of anger he'd shown. "She left when he was 6 months old, signed over custody, sends money sometimes. He asks about her less now." "That must be hard." The hard part is watching him pretend it doesn't hurt. Evan met her eyes, and she saw something in them that made her chest tighten. The fierce, helpless love of a parent who can't protect their child from everything. But we manage. We have each other. Miranda found herself telling him things she rarely shared. About her father, who'd built Vale Industries and then died of a heart attack at 52, leaving her an empire she'd been too young to handle. About the pressure of proving herself, of fighting off board members who thought a 23-year-old woman couldn't possibly fill her father's shoes. About the loneliness of success, how every relationship seemed transactional, every conversation weighted with unspoken agendas. You ever just want to walk away from it? Evan asked. Start over somewhere nobody knows your name. Every day. She finished her whiskey, feeling the warmth settle. But then what? I've spent 10 years building something that matters, proving I'm more than my father's daughter. Walking away would mean all of that was for nothing. Or it would mean you did it. Proved what you needed to prove. And now you're free to choose what comes next. The perspective shift was so simple it almost hurt. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. He smiled, and it transformed his tired face into something younger, more open. I just don't have the luxury of complicated philosophy. When you're barely keeping your head above water as a black single dad, you learn to focus on what actually matters. It was nearly 4:30 when Miranda glanced at her phone and saw the 17 missed calls from her assistant. The real world was calling, demanding her attention with the insistence of responsibility. I should go, she said reluctantly, though she made no move to stand. Probably. Evan started collecting empty glasses, his movements efficient and practiced. Miranda watched him work for a moment, this man who'd somehow made her forget herself for a few hours. She pulled out a business card, real business card stock embossed, the kind that cost $6 each, and set it on the bar. I'd like to see you again, she said directly, because she'd learned early that indirection was for people afraid of rejection. Dinner? Somewhere nicer than this. Where? Evan picked up the card, his thumb running over the raised letters of her name. She watched his face change as he read, the slight widening of eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in posture as pieces clicked into place. Miranda Vale, CEO, Vale Enterprises, the woman who'd been on the cover of Fortune last month. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, setting the card back down between them like he was returning something precious and dangerous. But I'm going to have to say no. The rejection hit her like cold water. Miranda had forgotten what this felt like, the sting of being turned down, the confusion of not getting what she wanted. Why? Because I don't date customers. It was such an obvious excuse that it was almost insulting. Bar policy. That's not the real reason. He met her eyes and she saw something in them that surprised her, respect, mixed with something that might have been regret. The real reason is that I know how this story goes. Woman like you, man like me, it doesn't end well. You get bored, I get hurt, and my son watches his father be a fool. So I'm saving us both the trouble. You're making assumptions. Her voice came out sharper than intended, wounded pride bleeding through. I'm making observations. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't yielding either. You came in here looking for something different, something real. And I am different. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not after anything you have. That's interesting to you right now, but interesting doesn't last. Eventually you'll remember you can have dinner with anyone in the city, and I'll remember I'm working 3 jobs to keep my head above water. Reality catches up. So you're protecting yourself. I'm protecting my son. The distinction mattered to him, she could tell. He's already lost one parent who couldn't handle real life. I won't let him get attached to someone who's going to disappear when the novelty wears off. Miranda stood, pulling her coat around her shoulders, with movements that were a little too precise, a little too controlled. You're wrong about me. Maybe, he said it gently, without malice, but I can't afford to find out. She walked to the door, her heels clicking on the worn floor. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. For what it's worth, Evan Brooks, I think you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe, he repeated, and his slight smile carried something like sadness, but it's mine to make. The door closed behind her, and Evan stood alone in the bar, the business card still sitting on the counter like evidence of something that had almost happened. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and then, after a long moment, slipped it into his pocket instead of the trash. Outside, Miranda sat in the back of her waiting car, her driver pretending not to notice the expression on her face. She pulled out her phone, opening the text thread with her best friend and board member, Catherine Chen. "Just got rejected by a bartender," she typed. The response came immediately. "Is he blind?" "No," Miranda wrote back, staring at her reflection in the dark window. "He's careful, and he thinks I'm going to break his heart." "Are you?" The question sat on the screen unanswered. Miranda thought about Evan Brooks, his tired eyes and careful hands, the way he'd listened like her words mattered, the fierce love in his voice when he spoke about his son. She thought about how he'd turned her down, not because he wasn't interested, but because he was protecting something more important than attraction. "I don't know," she finally replied, "but I'm going to find out." She made a decision then, one that had nothing to do with business strategy or calculated risk. 5 minutes. That's all it would take. 5 minutes of genuine interest before Evan Brooks got bored or overwhelmed or realized she was exactly what he expected. 5 minutes before the differences between their worlds became too much and he walked away like everyone eventually did. She'd give him 5 minutes. And if he stayed longer, if he somehow lasted past that initial flash of curiosity and into something real, well, then maybe she'd been wrong about what was possible. It became a private bet with herself, the kind of challenge Miranda thrived on. 5 minutes of her real attention, her genuine self, before he proved her right and disappeared like everyone else who claimed they wanted our real. What Miranda didn't know, what she couldn't know, sitting in the back of that car at 4:45 in the morning, was that Evan Brooks wasn't like everyone else. He was a man who'd spent years learning that the things worth having were the things worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth protecting, even when protection looked like pushing away what you wanted most. The bet was made, the game had begun, and neither of them had any idea how it would change everything. The next night, Evan arrived at the Lighthouse Bar to find a single red rose lying across his station, still fresh with morning dew. No note, no card, just the flower and the faint scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. Marcus, the day bartender, caught his expression and grinned. "You holding out on me, Brooks?" Some lady came in around noon. Wouldn't give her name. Just left that and said you'd know who it was from. Evan picked up the rose carefully, thorns and all. He should throw it away. Should ignore it. Ignore her. Go back to the safe simplicity of his carefully controlled life. Instead, he found himself pressing the rose between the pages of his law textbook when he got home that morning, preserving it like it meant something. Miranda, for her part, wasn't used to patience. She'd built an empire by seeing what she wanted and taking it, by moving faster than the competition, by never giving anyone time to tell her no. But something about Evan's rejection had lodged itself under her skin like a splinter. Not painful exactly, but impossible to ignore. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments. During board meetings, she'd remember the way he'd called her out on feeling lonely, the casual certainty that had somehow given her permission to be honest. While reviewing acquisition proposals, she'd recall how he'd described his son, the fierce protectiveness in every word. At charity galas, where men in expensive suits tried to impress her with their portfolios and their pedigrees, she'd think about a black man in a white shirt who'd turned her down because he couldn't afford to be wrong. Catherine found her distracted during their weekly dinner, her attention drifting to her phone every few minutes. "You're checking to see if he called," Catherine observed, cutting into her perfectly prepared salmon. "I gave him my card. Standard business practice." Miranda said it too quickly, too defensively. "And the roses you had delivered?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Miranda." Catherine set down her fork, her expression shifting from amused to serious. "I've known you since Harvard. I've watched you close billion-dollar deals without blinking. I've never seen you chase someone who said no." "I'm not chasing him." "Then what are you doing?" Miranda was quiet for a long moment, swirling wine in her glass and watching the light catch it. "Do you remember what you said when I took over Vail Enterprises? When the board was trying to force me out and every newspaper was questioning whether I could possibly fill my father's shoes. I said you were the smartest person I knew, and they were fools to doubt you. You said something else too. You said that being right gets lonely when everyone's rooting for you to fail." Miranda met her friend's eyes. "That bartender, Evan, he looked at me like I was just a person. Not a success story, not a threat, not an opportunity. Just a woman sitting in a bar at 3 in the morning. Do you know how long it's been since someone saw me like that? So you're interested in him because he doesn't care about your money. I'm interested in him because he cares about more important things. His son, his mother. Keeping his promises even when they cost him. Miranda's voice softened. He turned me down to protect his kid from getting hurt. When was the last time someone in my life chose integrity over opportunity? Catherine reached across the table, squeezing her friend's hand. Just be careful. Men who've been hurt before, they don't trust easy. And when they do trust, they go all in. If you're not serious about this, if you're just intrigued by the novelty of someone saying no, walk away now before anyone gets damaged. And if I am serious, then I hope he's worth it. Catherine smiled, but concern lingered in her eyes. And I hope you're ready for what it means to be with someone who has nothing to lose by walking away. The warning settled in Miranda's chest, both sobering and challenging. She was Miranda Vale, a woman who'd built an empire before 30. She didn't back down from challenges. She didn't quit when things got complicated. But she also didn't chase men who didn't want to be caught. Until now, a week passed, then 2. The rose remained pressed in Evan's textbook, a secret he didn't examine too closely. He told himself he was being smart, protecting Danny, keeping his life uncomplicated. He told himself a lot of things that would have been more convincing if he could stop thinking about the way Miranda Vale had looked in the dim bar light, the honesty in her voice when she'd admitted to being lonely. Danny noticed his distraction during their Saturday morning ritual, pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, a tradition they'd started when his son was 3 and milk was still the beverage of choice. Dad. Danny looked up from his Triceratops pancake, his expression serious in the way 7-year-olds get when they're trying to understand adult mysteries. Are you sad? No, buddy, why would you think that? You keep staring at stuff without seeing it. That's what you do when you're worried about Grandma. Evan's heart constricted. His son was too young to be that perceptive, too young to carry worry about whether his father was okay. I'm not sad, just thinking about some stuff from work. Is it about the pretty lady? The question froze Evan mid-flip. What pretty lady? The one who came to the bar last week. Mr. Marcus told me when I went to visit. He said, she must have been really pretty because you looked different after she left. Danny's expression turned hopeful in a way that hurt. Is she going to be my mom? And there it was. The reason Evan had turned Miranda down crystallized in his son's eager face. Danny wanted a mother with the desperate hope of a child who'd learned too young that mothers could leave. He wanted it badly enough that any woman entering their life would immediately become a potential answer to that hole in his world. No, Danny. Evan sat down next to his son, abandoning the pancakes. She's not going to be anybody's mom. She was just a customer at the bar. But Mr. Marcus said, Mr. Marcus talks too much. Evan softened the words with a gentle ruffle of Danny's tight curls. Listen to me. It's just you and me, okay? Same as always. That's not going to change. But what if you met someone nice? Someone who liked dinosaurs and didn't mind that we only have one bathroom. Danny's voice carried the careful hope of a child who'd learned to ask for things quietly, expecting nothing. Then I'd make sure she was really nice and really liked you before I even thought about anything else. Evan pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of syrup and shampoo and the warm, familiar smell of his little boy's brown skin. But you don't worry about that. Your job is to be 7 years old and love dinosaurs. My job is to take care of us. Deal? Deal. Danny hugged him back, fierce and trusting. Dad? Yeah? You're really good at pancakes. Evan laughed, the tightness in his chest easing slightly. High praise from an expert. But later, after Danny had gone to bed and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of old pipes and distant traffic, Evan found himself pulling out Miranda's business card. He didn't call. He wasn't ready to cross that line. Wasn't ready to risk what a phone call might mean. But he looked at it, running his thumb over the embossed letters the same way he had that first night. Miranda Vale, CEO, Vale Enterprises. A woman so far out of his league they weren't even playing the same sport. And yet, he remembered the loneliness in her voice, the way she'd admitted to feeling trapped by her own success. He remembered how she'd listened to his stories about Danny without that glazed look people got when parents talked about their kids. He remembered thinking, just for a moment, that maybe he'd misjudged her. Then he remembered his son asking if she was going to be his mother, and he put the card away. Some risks weren't worth taking, some chances cost too much. He told himself that for 3 more days, right up until Miranda Vale walked back into the Lighthouse bar. She came alone this time, dressed down in jeans and a sweater that probably still cost more than his rent, but looked almost normal. It was a Tuesday night, the bar half full with regulars who barely glanced up when she entered. She took the same stool as before, folding her hands on the bar and waiting for him to acknowledge her. Evan finished serving another customer before approaching, his expression carefully neutral. "Whiskey, please." She watched him pour, noting the economy of his movements, the efficiency of someone who'd learned to waste nothing. Not time, not energy, not words. He set the glass in front of her and moved to step away, but she spoke before he could retreat. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. Could have fooled me, but there was no heat in it, just weary curiosity. I've been thinking about what you said, about how this story goes, how it ends." She lifted the glass but didn't drink, just held it like a prop. "You're probably right. Statistically, logically, based on every similar situation in human history, you're probably right." "Okay, but here's the thing about statistics and logic and history. They're backward-looking. They tell you what already happened, not what could happen." She finally met his eyes, and he saw something in them that looked like genuine uncertainty. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to have dinner with me. 1 meal. No expectations, no obligations. Just 2 people eating food and talking." "I told you." "I know what you told me. You're protecting your son. That's admirable. It's actually one of the things that made me want to know you better." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "But I'm not asking to meet your son. I'm not asking to be part of your life. I'm asking for 2 hours of your time in a public restaurant with no strings attached. If you have a horrible time, you never have to see me again. If I turn out to be everything you expected, shallow, bored, using you as a curiosity, you get to say, 'I told you so,' and we both move on. And if neither of those things happens, then maybe we have a second dinner, or maybe we don't. But at least we'll know instead of guessing." Evan studied her, looking for the angle, the hidden cost, the catch that always came with offers that seemed too good. But all he saw was a woman who'd put herself out there with remarkable honesty, risking rejection for the second time because she thought he might be worth it. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why me? You could have dinner with anyone in the city. Why push this?" "Honestly," she smiled a little, wry and self-aware, "because you said no. Because you looked at me and saw past the money and the power and whatever else people see, and you still said no because you had something more important to protect. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people in my life would sell their grandmother for an opportunity? So I'm interesting because I'm unavailable. That's not much better than what I said before. You're interesting because you're honest. Because you work 3 jobs and take care of your mother and raise your son and still find time to make sure a drunk regular gets home safe. Because you listened when I talked instead of just waiting for your turn to speak. Because when I admitted to being lonely, you didn't try to fix it or diminish it. You just acknowledged it was hard." Her voice softened. "You're interesting because you're a good person in a world where good people are undervalued and overlooked." The words hit harder than they should have, reaching something deep in Evan's chest that he'd learned to keep locked away. He'd spent so long being practical, being careful, being the responsible one who made smart choices. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as something more than the sum of his obligations. "1 dinner," he heard himself say, surprised by the words even as they left his mouth. "My night off is Friday. Somewhere casual, nowhere too expensive, and I pay for my own meal." Miranda's smile was luminous, transforming her face into something beyond beautiful, something joyful and real and almost vulnerable. "Deal, except for the paying part. You pick the place, I'll pick up the check. That's non-negotiable." Miranda: "It's just money, Evan, and I have more of it than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Let me buy you dinner without it meaning anything except that I asked and I can afford it. Please." The please did it. The recognition that she was asking, not assuming, not leveraging power, but offering something simple and human. Okay, he agreed, but nothing fancy. There's an Italian place near campus, family owned, real food. Meet me there at 7. I'll be there. She finished her whiskey, set cash on the bar that was twice what she owed, and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. Evan? Yeah? Thank you for saying yes. Then she was gone, leaving him standing behind the bar with the certain knowledge that he'd just made either the best or worst decision of his life. Marcus appeared from the back room, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Please tell me that was her. Please tell me you didn't just turn down Miranda Vale again. I didn't turn her down. Evan started wiping down the bar with more force than necessary. We're having dinner Friday. You lucky bastard. Or the dumbest man alive. Jury's still out. But as he worked through the rest of his shift, Evan found himself counting the days until Friday with something that felt dangerously close to anticipation. He told himself it was just dinner, just 2 hours, just a chance to prove they had nothing in common so he could stop wondering. He told himself a lot of things that would have been more convincing if his hands weren't shaking slightly when he pulled out his phone and added dinner with Miranda to his calendar. 5 minutes, she told herself. She'd give him 5 minutes of genuine attention before he got bored or overwhelmed or proved her right about what happened when different worlds tried to collide. What neither of them knew yet was that 5 minutes had already passed. They'd blown past it that first night at the bar in the honesty of their conversation and the recognition of something rare passing between them. The bet was already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. Friday arrived with the kind of autumn weather that makes everything feel possible. Crisp air, golden light, leaves the color of fire falling like slow promises. Evan spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on dark jeans and a button-down shirt that Danny solemnly approved of. You look handsome, Dad, his son announced, inspecting him with 7-year-old gravitas. Is this for the pretty lady? It's just dinner with a friend, buddy. Mom used to say that people who are just friends don't get nervous about what they wear. Danny said it innocently, repeating something he'd overheard years ago, but the words landed heavy. Evan knelt down, meeting his son's eyes, dark brown, staring back at him from a smaller, rounder face, framed by tight curls. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? That's what Grandma says. Danny hugged him spontaneously, fierce and quick. Have fun, Dad. You deserve fun. The simple blessings from his 7-year-old nearly undid him. Evan held on an extra moment, breathing in the scent of his son's curls and the indefinable sweetness of childhood, reminding himself why he was careful. Why he protected what mattered, why some risks couldn't be taken lightly. Mrs. Chen from down the hall had agreed to watch Danny for the evening, her grandmotherly eyes twinkling with knowing approval when Evan explained he had plans. He escaped before she could ask too many questions, walking to the restaurant because the October evening was beautiful and he needed the time to think. Romanos had been serving authentic Italian food for 40 years. Run by the same family, occupying the same corner with the same red-checkered tablecloths and the same smell of garlic and basil that had become inseparable from the space itself. Evan had discovered it during his first year of night school when he'd splurged on a plate of pasta to celebrate a good grade and ended up making friends with the owner's grandson, Marco. He arrived 15 minutes early, habit and nervousness combining into uncharacteristic punctuality. Marco spotted him from behind the host stand and grinned. Evan, you finally bringing a date to my restaurant? I thought this day would never come. It's just dinner, Marco. Don't make a thing. Everything's a thing when you never do anything. Marco grabbed menus with a flourish. I'm putting you in the back corner. The table by the window. Very romantic. Marco, trust me, my friend. You want romantic. Evan let himself be led to the table, trying not to think about whether he wanted romantic or not. The corner was nice, quiet, lit by the amber glow of streetlights through the window, far enough from other diners to allow for private conversation. He sat facing the door out of old habit, watching customers come and go, nursing the water Marco had poured with exaggerated ceremony. Miranda arrived exactly at 7, and Evan's first thought was that she'd listened. She wore jeans and a simple green sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup. She'd made herself almost ordinary, and the effort touched him more than any expensive dress could have. She spotted him and smiled, and that smile did something complicated to his chest. Equal parts terror and possibility. "Hi," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I wasn't sure either," he admitted, and the honesty made her laugh. "At least we're both uncertain together. That's something." They ordered. She took his recommendation on the pasta. He suggested the wine. And suddenly they were just two people having dinner instead of a billionaire CEO and a black bartender trying to bridge impossible distance. The conversation flowed easier than it should have, natural and unforced, covering everything and nothing. She told him about growing up as an only child with a father who built empires and expected perfection, about the pressure of inheriting more than money, expectations, assumptions, a legacy that didn't leave room for failure. He told her about his own father, a man who'd promised to stay and left instead, teaching young Evan that words meant nothing if actions didn't back them up. "Is that why you're so careful?" Miranda asked, twirling pasta on her fork with the kind of focus that suggested the question mattered. "Because you learned early that people leave?" "Maybe." Evan considered it, appreciated that she asked instead of assumed. "Or maybe I'm careful because I learned what it costs when they do. My mother worked herself half to death after he left. I watched her choose between rent and food, between pride and asking for help. I won't do that to Danny. I won't let him wonder if his father's gonna stay. So you stay." "So I stay." He said it simply, a fact as fundamental as gravity. "That's admirable." She meant it. He could tell, and terrifying, for anyone trying to get close to you. Because they know if they leave, there'll be another person who hurt you and your son. The stakes are never just about the two of you. The perception caught him off guard. She'd seen something he'd barely articulated to himself. "Is that what you're trying to do? Get close?" "I don't know yet." She met his eyes, and her honesty was disarming. "I'm trying to figure out if there's something here worth exploring, if you're the kind of person who'd be worth the complication. And jury is still out, but I'm leaning yes." They talked through dinner and into dessert, tiramisu that Marco insisted they try, sharing the plate between them like the intimacy of it was already decided. She asked about his classes, genuinely interested in his studies on contract law and constitutional precedent. He asked about Vale Enterprises, and she explained her latest acquisition, a struggling green energy company she was rebuilding from the ground up with a passion that made her beautiful in an entirely new way. "You really love it," he observed. "The work, not just the success." "I love building things, taking something broken and making it better, stronger. There's a satisfaction in that." She paused, considering. "Is that what you want from law? I mean, to build things? To protect things?" "Actually, to make sure people like my mother have someone who fights for them when the system tries to grind them down." He said it with the quiet conviction of someone who'd thought about it extensively. Rich people have entire firms on retainer. Poor people have overworked public defenders and a system that assumes they're guilty. I want to balance that scale, even just a little. Miranda was quiet for a moment, something shifting in her expression. "You know what's funny? I went into business to build an empire. You're going into law to make sure empires don't crush people. We're almost opposites." "Almost," he smiled. "Except you're using your empire to build green energy and create jobs. Maybe we're not as opposite as we look." They talked about books and movies, discovered a shared love of old noir films and a mutual hatred of cilantro. She told him about the pressure of constant visibility, how exhausting it was to have every decision scrutinized and analyzed. He told her about the quiet satisfaction of small victories, Danny's good report card, his mother's rare good days, the regular who just celebrated 5 years sober. "Your life is rich," Miranda said eventually, and it wasn't condescending or pitying, just observation. "Not in money, but in meaning. Everything you do matters to someone. Everything you do matters to thousands of people, your employees, their families, the communities where you build. That's not nothing. No, but it's abstract. Numbers on a spreadsheet, metrics in a quarterly report. When was the last time I knew I made a real difference in someone's actual life?" She looked down at her empty wine glass. "I built an empire, Evan. But sometimes I wonder if I built anything that matters. You helped fund the clinic where my mother gets her care. Vale Foundation grant 3 years ago. That matters." He said it quietly, watching recognition dawn on her face. Your money paid for the nurse who sits with her when she's confused. The medication that keeps her comfortable. You might not see it, but trust me, it matters. Her eyes went bright with emotion. She quickly blinked away. I didn't know that. Why would you? You've probably funded hundreds of clinics. He reached across the table, a gesture that surprised them both, his hand covering hers. But that's my point. You're doing things that matter. You're just too busy building to notice the impact. They stayed like that for a moment, hands touching across the table in Romano's back corner, while around them, the restaurant carried on its Friday night rhythm. It was a small moment, barely significant, but it felt like something shifting, like the distance between their worlds narrowing just slightly. Marco appeared to clear their plates, his knowing smile irritating and comforting in equal measure. Can I interest you in coffee? Or perhaps you'd like to just sit and talk all night. I don't close for another hour, and you two seem occupied. Coffee sounds good, Miranda said, not breaking eye contact with Evan. If that's okay. Coffee's good, he agreed. They talked for another hour, covering the comfortable and uncomfortable with equal honesty. She admitted her last relationship had ended because she'd worked through their anniversary dinner without noticing. He admitted he sometimes used Danny as an excuse to avoid risking anything personal. She confessed to being scared of ending up alone with nothing but her bank account for company. He confessed to being terrified that anyone who got close would eventually decide he wasn't worth the struggle. You know what I think? Miranda said eventually as they stood to leave. The restaurant empty now, except for Marco pretending not to eavesdrop. I think we're both scared of the same thing. What's that? That we might actually be worth the risk. They walked out together into the October night, the air colder now, carrying the promise of winter. Evan's car was parked in the opposite direction from where Miranda's driver waited, creating a natural moment of decision. Thank you, she said, for saying yes, for giving this a chance. Thank you for asking twice, for not taking no for an answer even when it would have been easier. Is this where I'm supposed to ask if I'll see you again? There was vulnerability in the question, rare for someone as powerful as Miranda Vale. Would you want to? Yes, no hesitation, no coyness. I'd like that very much. Then I guess you'll see me again? He smiled, feeling something ease in his chest. Not all the caution, not all the protection, but enough to breathe deeper. But next time I'm paying. We'll negotiate. She stepped closer, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she just touched his arm, a brief contact that somehow felt more intimate than a kiss might have been. Good night, Evan Brooks. Good night, Miranda Vale. He watched her walk to her car, watched the driver open her door with practiced precision, watched her disappear into the back seat. Only when the car had pulled away did he turn toward his own vehicle, his thoughts a complicated tangle of hope and fear and possibility. He'd given her one dinner. That was all he'd promised. One meal, one evening, one chance to prove they had nothing in common. Instead, he'd found someone who understood loneliness and pressure, who didn't flinch from his struggles or try to fix everything with money, who saw him as a whole person instead of a project or a curiosity. 5 minutes, she told herself. Just 5 minutes before he proved her right about how these things ended. But they'd spent 3 hours together, and neither of them had gotten bored, overwhelmed, or scared off by the reality of who they were. The 5 minutes were up. The bet was lost. And neither of them had any idea what came next, except that they wanted to find out. The second dinner happened 3 days later, this time at a Thai restaurant Miranda suggested in a neighborhood Evan had never visited, the kind of place where the menu came in 3 languages and the servers knew regulars by name. She arrived before him, already seated at a corner table with spring rolls and 2 glasses of water waiting. You're early, Evan said, sliding into the chair across from her. I was nervous. She said it with a slight smile that suggested she wasn't used to admitting such things. Kept thinking you might change your mind. I almost did, about 6 times between Friday and today. He picked up a spring roll, appreciating that she'd already ordered appetizers. It suggested comfort, assumption of welcome. Danny asked me this morning if you were my girlfriend. I didn't know what to tell him. What did you say? That you were a friend I was getting to know. He watched her face for signs of panic or retreat. He wanted to know if that meant you'd come over for dinosaur movie night. I told him probably not. Why probably not? There was genuine curiosity in the question, not offense. Because I don't introduce people to my son unless I know they're staying. And I don't know that yet. He met her eyes, needing her to understand. That's not a criticism, it's just reality. We've had 2 dinners. That doesn't mean anything except we enjoyed each other's company twice. Fair enough. She took a spring roll, dipping it in sauce with careful precision. For what it's worth, I think about him, your son. I wonder what he's like, whether he has your eyes. If he's as stubborn as you are. He's more stubborn, gets it from his grandmother. Evan softened despite himself. He's smart, curious about everything. Wants to be a paleontologist this week. Last week it was an astronaut. The week before that, a chef who only makes breakfast food. Miranda laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. 7-year-olds contain multitudes. They do. It's exhausting and amazing in equal measure. He paused, then decided honesty was the only path forward. You should know, if this goes anywhere, if we become something real, Danny comes first. Always. That's not negotiable. I wouldn't respect you if it was any other way. She said it with such simple certainty that something in his chest loosened. Evan, I'm not asking to compete with your son. I'm asking to get to know you. If that eventually includes meeting him, great. If it doesn't work out before we get there, then we'll both move on. But right now, in this moment, can we just be 2 people having dinner without mapping out the entire future? The perspective shift was both relief and challenge. She was right that he was catastrophizing, planning for disaster before anything had really begun. But she also didn't understand that for him, every choice about his personal life was about disaster planning. One wrong decision, one person who hurt Danny or left without warning could damage his son in ways that might take years to heal. I can try, he said finally. But fair warning, I'm not good at living in the moment. I'm always 3 steps ahead looking for problems. Then I'll have to work harder to keep you present. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his, starting with this. What's the best thing that happened to you this week? The question was so unexpected, so deliberately focused on the positive that it took him a moment to answer. Danny learned to tie his shoes. Finally. We'd been practicing for months, and Tuesday morning he just did it. Perfect loops and everything. He was so proud he wore those shoes to bed that night. Miranda's smile transformed her face. That's beautiful. What about you? Best thing this week? This, she gestured between them. Sitting here, learning about shoe tying victories, realizing that some things are worth being nervous about. They ordered dinner, pad thai for him, green curry for her, enough to share because somewhere between Friday and today they'd crossed into the kind of comfort where sharing food felt natural. The conversation flowed like a continuation rather than a new beginning, picking up threads from their last dinner and weaving them into something richer. She told him about a board meeting that morning where she'd had to defend her decision to keep a barely profitable division open because it employed 300 people in a town with few other options. 2 board members had called it sentimental. She'd called it responsible capitalism and won the vote by 1. You could have just shut it down, Evan observed. Would have been easier, more profitable. Easier isn't always better, and profit isn't the only metric that matters. She said it with quiet conviction. My father taught me that. He used to say, any fool can make money by destroying things. It takes wisdom to build wealth that lifts people up. He sounds like he was a good man. He was brilliant and flawed, and I miss him every day. Her voice caught slightly. He had a heart attack in his office, alone, working late like always. They found him the next morning. I was in Paris closing a deal, being everything he'd trained me to be, and I wasn't there when it mattered. Evan heard the guilt beneath the words, the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade. You know it's not your fault, right? That him dying alone wasn't something you could have prevented by being psychic. Intellectually, yes, but grief doesn't care about logic. She took a breath, steadying herself. Sorry, that got heavy fast. Don't apologize. Heavy is real. I'd rather have heavy and honest than light and fake. He kept his hand where she could reach it if she needed, offering without insisting. My mother doesn't remember me most days now. The disease has taken so much that sometimes I visit and she thinks I'm my father. She smiles at me like I'm the man who left her, and I have to pretend everything's fine because correcting her just upsets her. That's heavy too. How do you do it? Stay present with her when she's lost? I remember that she's still in there somewhere. The woman who taught me to read, who worked doubles so I could have school supplies, who never once made me feel like I was a burden, even when money was tight. She's still there, just buried. His voice roughened. So I sit with her and I tell her about Danny. And sometimes she calls me by my father's name and I answer to it because at least in that moment she's happy. Miranda's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're a good son. I'm an exhausted son who's doing his best. He cleared his throat, needing to lighten the mood before they both drowned in sadness. But enough about heavy things. Tell me something ridiculous about being rich. Something that would make me laugh at how weird your life is. She blinked, then laughed, grateful for the shift. Okay. Last month, I had to fire my personal shopper because she kept buying me clothes in a size smaller than I wear. You're kidding. I wish I was. She'd spent $30,000 on clothes I couldn't wear because she decided my ideal body was 2 sizes smaller than my actual body. When I asked why, she said she was manifesting my ideal body and thought the motivation would help. $30,000. Evan tried to wrap his mind around it. That's more than I make in a year. I know, and I'm aware of how ridiculous that sounds. She met his eyes, checking for judgment. Does it bother you? The money? Honestly, sometimes. Not because I resent it, but because I can't quite comprehend it. You spent more on unwearable clothes than I'll spend on everything for the next year. That's hard to reconcile. He was quiet for a moment. But then I remember that you funded the clinic that helps my mother, that you're keeping 300 people employed because it's the right thing to do. And I think maybe the money matters less than what you do with it. That's generous of you. It's honest. There's a difference. He smiled slightly. Besides, if I'm going to get uncomfortable about wealth disparity, I should probably start with the entire economic system rather than one woman who's trying to use her resources responsibly. Political and principled. I like it. She leaned back, studying him with open curiosity. Can I ask you something potentially offensive? That's a great start to a question. Do you want to be rich? Is that part of why you're going to law school? Building towards something bigger? Evan considered the question seriously, appreciating that she'd asked directly. I want stability. I want to not worry about whether I can afford Danny's field trip or whether one unexpected expense will destroy our budget. I want to visit my mother without calculating whether I can afford the gas. But rich? Like you're rich? No. That's not my goal. Why not? Because I've learned that enough is a real number, not an endless pursuit. Enough to be comfortable, to give Danny opportunities, to help people who need it. That's what I want. More than that starts to cost things that matter more than money. He gestured around the restaurant. Right now, this is enough. Good food, good company. No stress about the bill because we split it like adults. Adding zeros to my bank account wouldn't make this better. What if I told you I think about that sometimes? About what enough looks like. Miranda's voice dropped. I have $3 billion. I could stop working tomorrow and live comfortably for 10 lifetimes, but I keep building, keep expanding, keep chasing the next deal, and I don't know if it's ambition or addiction or just fear of stopping long enough to feel empty. What would you do if you stopped? I have no idea. She laughed, but it carried an edge of real fear. I've been working since I was 22, building, acquiring, proving myself. If I stop being Miranda Vale, CEO, I don't know who Miranda Vale person even is anymore. Then maybe that's something worth figuring out, Evan said it gently, without judgment. Not stopping forever, but maybe stopping long enough to remember what you're building toward instead of just building. They sat with that for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Around them, the restaurant hummed with other conversations, other lives intersecting over shared meals. But in their corner, there was only this, 2 people from different worlds trying to understand each other without maps or guarantees. The waiter brought dessert, mango sticky rice, that neither had ordered but both accepted, and they split it with the easy intimacy of people who'd already decided that sharing was better than separating. Can I tell you something? Miranda asked, her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Seems like we're past the point of asking permission. I've been thinking about your 5-minute theory, about how you thought I'd get bored or overwhelmed once the novelty wore off. She set down her spoon, meeting his eyes directly. I think you're wrong. I think the problem isn't that the novelty will wear off. It's that this is the least novel thing I've done in years. You're not interesting because you're different from my usual life. You're interesting because you're real in a way nothing else is. Miranda, let me finish. She took a breath. I'm scared. I'm terrified, actually, because I like you, really like you, and I don't know how to do this. How to date someone who doesn't want anything from me except my actual company. I don't know the rules when there's no transaction, no angle, no benefit beyond just being together. That's new territory. Welcome to how I've felt since you walked into my bar. Evan reached across the table, taking her hand properly this time. I'm terrified too. Because you're brilliant and beautiful, and so far out of my league, we're not even playing the same sport, and I don't know how to do this either. How to date someone whose lunch meeting is more important than most people's careers. But I think maybe the point is that we're both scared and we're trying anyway. So we're just two terrified people eating Thai food and hoping we don't screw this up. Basically, he smiled, squeezing her hand. But we're doing it with honesty. That's got to count for something. They finished dessert slowly, neither in a hurry for the evening to end. When the bill came, they split it despite Miranda's protest, Evan insisting with enough firmness that she backed down with amused grace. Outside, the October night had turned properly cold, their breath visible in the streetlight glow. I should go, Miranda said, though she made no move toward her waiting car. I have an early meeting, investor call at 7. I should go too. Danny's probably still awake, trying to convince Mrs. Chen that bedtime is a suggestion. But Evan didn't move either, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that somehow suited her perfectly. When can I see you again, she asked. You're asking me this time. I'm establishing pattern, taking initiative, being modern, but there was vulnerability beneath the humor. Thursday, if you're free. There's this event at the Natural History Museum, after hours, adults only. They do it once a month. Danny's been begging me to go, and I thought... He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. I thought maybe you'd want to come. If dinosaurs and dioramas sound interesting. Miranda's smile was luminous. That sounds perfect. What time? 7:30. I can meet you there. I'll be there. She stepped closer, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his cheek. Quick, warm, leaving the scent of her perfume and the ghost of contact. Good night, Evan. Good night, Miranda. He watched her leave again, the routine already becoming familiar. But this time, when he turned toward his own car, his cheek still warm from her kiss, he felt something shift. A tiny loosening of the protective walls he'd built, a cautious opening toward possibility. His phone buzzed with a text as he unlocked his car door. Catherine's name lit the screen, though he'd never given her his number. She's glowing. Thank you for that. He stared at the message, processing the implications. Miranda had talked about him, shared enough that her best friend felt compelled to reach out. It should have been invasive, maybe even concerning. Instead, it felt like proof that this mattered, that he wasn't alone in feeling like something significant was building. He typed back carefully. She makes it easy. The response came immediately. Don't break her heart. She acts tough, but she breaks easy. We both know it. Evan sat in his dark car, cold seeping through the windows, considering his answer. Finally, I won't. But you should know, mine's not exactly armored either. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, good. You both deserve something real. Don't overthink it. He drove home through empty streets, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. Mrs. Chen reported that Danny had fallen asleep halfway through a documentary about pterodactyls, and yes, he'd brushed his teeth first. Evan thanked her, paid her the agreed rate plus extra, and found his son sprawled across his bed, one arm flung over his favorite stuffed triceratops. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching Danny sleep, brown cheek pressed into the pillow, curls a soft halo on the case, feeling the weight and gift of this small person who trusted him completely. Everything he did, every choice, every risk, every moment of vulnerability had to be measured against the impact on this child. That was the promise he'd made the day Danny was born, the covenant that superseded everything else. I'm trying, buddy, he whispered into the dark room, trying to be careful and brave at the same time. Hope I'm getting it right. Danny stirred, but didn't wake, and Evan finally retreated to his own room, his phone showing a new message from Miranda. Thank you for tonight, for sharing the heavy stuff, for not pretending everything's simple. He texted back, Thank you for asking about the heavy stuff, for caring about shoe-tying victories. Those are the best kind of victories, she replied, the small, real ones. They texted for another 20 minutes. Nothing profound. Just thoughts about the evening, plans for Thursday, the comfortable chatter of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. When he finally set his phone down and closed his eyes, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hopeful. The week passed in a strange suspension between ordinary life and anticipation. Evan worked his shifts, attended classes, helped Danny with homework, visited his mother in the facility where she sometimes knew him and sometimes didn't. But underneath the routine ran a current of something new, something that made even mundane moments feel lighter. Miranda texted him throughout the week. Nothing demanding or excessive, just small check-ins that acknowledged she was thinking about him, a photo of her coffee with the caption, "Nowhere near as good as bar coffee." A question about whether his contracts exam went well. A random update that she'd convinced her board to increase employee health care coverage, followed by also, yay. Thought you'd appreciate that. He found himself looking forward to her messages, the small interruptions that connected their separate worlds. He'd never been much of a texter. His phone was functional, a tool rather than an appendage. But with Miranda, it felt different, natural, like carrying on a conversation that started in the bar and hadn't ended yet. Thursday arrived with rain, the kind of steady October downpour that made everything gleam. Evan worried about it, worried the weather would make her cancel, would provide an easy out if she'd reconsidered, would give her an excuse to remember she was a billionaire with better things to do than spend an evening at a museum with a black bartender who still took the bus sometimes. But at 6:15, his phone lit up. "Still on for tonight? I promise not to melt in the rain." He smiled despite himself. "Still on. See you at 7:30. The museum after hours was transformed, stripped of daytime crowds and school groups, left with only adults who'd paid premium prices for the privilege of wandering empty halls. Evan arrived early out of habit, using the extra minutes to shake off rain and nerves in equal measure. The dinosaur exhibit loomed in the main hall, massive skeletons frozen mid-stride, ancient drama captured in bone and imagination. "Impressive, isn't it?" Miranda's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her approaching. Her hair damp despite the umbrella still in her hand, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more accessible. "Makes you feel small, in a good way." Evan smiled, already imagining his son's reaction. Danny would lose his mind. He's been drawing dinosaurs for weeks, preparing for when I bring him. This is recon. Smart. Scout the territory first. She stepped beside him, close enough that their arms brushed. "I haven't been to a museum in years. Not properly, anyway. There was a fundraiser here last spring, but that doesn't count. Too many people trying to be seen, not enough people actually looking at anything." They wandered through the exhibit slowly, stopping to read plaques and stare at displays that captured moments from millions of years ago. Miranda asked questions about the dinosaurs, admitting she'd barely paid attention in science class because she'd been too focused on business courses. Evan shared what he'd learned from Danny's obsessive research, the facts delivered with the authority of a 7-year-old's passionate certainty. So the Brachiosaurus could have looked through a 4-story window? Miranda peered up at the towering skeleton, awed and slightly skeptical. According to Danny's calculations, yes, though he admits the window size might vary depending on the building. Evan grinned. He's very precise about his dinosaur facts. "He sounds wonderful." She said it with genuine warmth. "You must be proud." Every single day. The words came easily, naturally. "Even when he's driving me crazy with dinosaur documentaries at 6 a.m., I'm proud. He's curious and kind and braver than I was at his age. He's the best thing I've ever done." They moved into the ocean exhibit, where blue light rippled across walls and ceiling, creating the illusion of being underwater. A massive whale skeleton hung suspended overhead, graceful despite its size, reminding them that giants had lived in more than one element. "Can I ask you something?" Miranda's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "About Danny's mother. You said she left. Is she part of his life at all?" Evan had known the question would come eventually. He'd prepared himself for it the way he prepared for anything potentially painful, by deciding to be honest. She sends birthday cards sometimes, money occasionally, but she's not present. Hasn't been since she left. He kept his eyes on the whale skeleton, finding it easier to talk without meeting Miranda's gaze. Her name's Rachel. We dated in college, got pregnant accidentally, and I thought we'd make it work. I was 23 and stupidly optimistic. What happened? Reality. He let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in his chest for years. She realized being a mother meant sacrifice she wasn't ready for. Late nights with a crying baby, career opportunities she'd have to postpone. Freedom she wasn't ready to give up. 6 months in, she told me she'd made a mistake. Not Danny, she was clear about that, but having him, keeping him, trying to be someone she wasn't. He finally looked at Miranda, needing her to understand. I told her it was okay to go, that staying out of obligation would hurt him more than leaving with honesty, so she left. That must have been devastating. It was clarifying. He turned back to the whale, its massive bones somehow peaceful in the manufactured ocean light. I learned that love isn't enough if the person doesn't want the life that comes with it. And I learned that I could do it alone. Raise him, be enough. Build something good, even without a partner. Those were hard lessons, but important ones. Miranda was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight. I need you to know something. I'm not Rachel. If I commit to something, to someone, I stay. That's who I am. My father taught me that your word matters. That following through is what separates people who matter from people who just make noise. I believe you. And he did. He could hear the conviction in her voice, the determination to be different from what he'd experienced before. But you also don't know yet what you're committing to. It's easy to promise to stay when everything's new and interesting. It's harder when it's 3 a.m. and Danny's throwing up, or when I'm exhausted from work and school and have nothing interesting to offer except company. Real life isn't museum dates and nice dinners. I know that. Do you? He said it gently, without accusation. I don't think you've ever been with someone who can't keep up with your world. Someone who has to say no to things because of money or time or responsibilities that can't be rescheduled. I don't think you've dated someone who comes with a 7-year-old who will need to like you and trust you and who might ask you questions about his mother that you won't know how to answer. You're right, I haven't. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. But I've also never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And maybe I'm naive. Maybe I'm underestimating how hard this will be. But I'd rather try and fail than not try because I'm scared of the difficulty. What if failing hurts Danny? What if he gets attached and you realize this isn't what you want and he loses another person? Evan's voice roughened with the fear he'd been carrying. That's what keeps me up at night, Miranda. Not whether you'll hurt me. I'm a grown man. I can handle heartbreak. But he's 7. He's innocent. He deserves protection. Then we protect him. She said it with quiet fierceness. We go slow. We don't introduce me to him until we're sure this is real and lasting. We give ourselves time to figure out if this works before we bring him into it. But Evan, you can't protect him from every possible hurt by never letting anyone in. That's not protection. That's isolation. The words landed hard because they were true. He'd been so focused on preventing another abandonment that he'd been building walls that kept out possibility along with danger. Danny needed a father who was present and protective, yes, but he also needed a father who modeled what healthy relationships looked like, who showed him that trust was worth the risk, even when it came with vulnerability. You're right, he admitted finally. I'm catastrophizing again. You're protecting your son. There's a difference. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. But maybe you can protect him and give this a chance at the same time. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive. They stood like that in the manufactured ocean light, holding hands beneath a whale skeleton, while around them other museum goers moved through exhibits and murmured about extinct species and vanished worlds. It felt symbolic somehow, 2 people trying not to become extinct themselves, trying to build something that would last beyond the immediate moment. Okay, Evan said quietly. We try, but slowly, carefully, with honesty about what's working and what isn't. Deal. Miranda squeezed his hand. Now come on! I want to see the gemstone exhibit. I have a possibly irrational love of sparkly rocks. The mood lightened as they moved through the rest of the museum, stopping to admire minerals and meteorites, debating whether dinosaurs had feathers and how ancient humans had survived without coffee. They took photos in front of a T-Rex skeleton, Miranda insisting they get one together despite Evan's protests about looking ridiculous. For posterity, she said, holding up her phone for a selfie. First official museum date. They looked good together in the photo. A black man in a denim jacket, her leaning into him, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling with genuine happiness. It was such a simple image, so normal that it almost hurt to look at. This was what regular couples did, what people who weren't burdened by wealth disparity and complicated histories got to have without overthinking it. Send that to me, he asked, and she did immediately, the photo appearing in his messages like proof that this was real, that he hadn't imagined the entire evening. They stayed until the museum closed, the last to leave, lingering over each exhibit like there would never be enough time to see everything. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Miranda's car waited at the curb, patient and expensive, a reminder of the differences between their worlds. Thank you for tonight, she said, standing close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. For sharing something you love, something that matters to Danny. That meant a lot. Thank you for being interested, for asking real questions instead of just pretending to care. He hesitated, then decided to be brave. Can I kiss you? Her smile was answer enough, but she said yes anyway, and then his mouth was on hers, and everything else fell away. She tasted like mint and rain, and something uniquely her, and she kissed him back with a hunger that suggested she'd been waiting for this as long as he had. It wasn't a first date kiss, tentative and testing. It was a kiss between people who'd already decided this mattered, who were past the point of pretending they weren't invested. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Miranda pressed her forehead to his. That was worth the wait. Was it everything you hoped? He tried for light, but couldn't quite manage it, too shaken by how right that had felt. Better. She kissed him once more, quick and sweet. I'll text you tomorrow. You better. He watched her car disappear into traffic, his lips still tingling from her kiss, his chest full of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. The bus ride home felt too long and too short at once. He needed time to process what was happening, but he also wanted to be home, wanted to check on Danny, wanted to ground himself in the reality of his life before he let himself get too carried away. Mrs. Chen reported another peaceful evening, Danny having fallen asleep reading a book about marine biology. Evan paid her, thanked her, and found his son exactly where she'd described, sprawled across his bed with a library book about whales still open beside him. He closed the book gently, marking the page, and pulled the blanket up over Danny's shoulders. His son stirred slightly, mumbling something that sounded like, "Did you see the T-Rex?" without waking. "I did, buddy," Evan whispered. "It was exactly as cool as you said it would be." His phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Home safe. Thank you for a perfect evening." The kiss was just a bonus. He smiled, typing back. The kiss was the main event. Everything else was just a bonus. "Flatterer," she replied. "I like it." They texted until past midnight. Nothing profound, just the comfortable conversation of people who couldn't quite let the evening end. When Evan finally forced himself to sleep, his last thought was that maybe, just maybe, he was allowed to have this. Maybe protecting Danny didn't mean denying himself connection. Maybe being careful and being brave weren't opposites. Maybe 5 minutes had been a ridiculous bet from the start, because what they were building couldn't be measured in minutes. It was measured in honesty and laughter, in museum dates and shared meals, in the willingness to try even when scared. The bet was lost before it began. They just hadn't admitted it yet. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between two people learning each other's rhythms. They fell into a pattern, dinners twice a week, texts throughout the day, phone calls late at night when Danny was asleep, and Miranda's work finally released her. Each conversation revealed new layers, new complexities, new reasons to keep trying, despite the obvious obstacles between their worlds. Evan learned that Miranda was afraid of flying despite traveling constantly for business. that she'd taken up painting during the pandemic and wasn't very good, but loved it anyway. That she cried at dog adoption commercials but maintained perfect composure during hostile board meetings. She learned that he could quote entire scenes from films he'd watched once years ago. That he made breakfast for dinner when he was too tired to think. That he'd secretly wanted to be a writer before life had demanded more practical ambitions. They were careful not to let their relationship bleed into the rest of their lives too quickly. Evan still hadn't introduced her to Danny, though his son had started asking more pointed questions about where Dad kept disappearing to twice a week. Miranda hadn't mentioned Evan to anyone except Catherine, keeping him separate from the scrutiny and speculation that would inevitably come if their relationship became public knowledge. It felt sustainable, this private bubble they'd created. Until the morning, everything shifted. Evan was working an early shift at the campus coffee shop, a third job he'd picked up to cover an unexpected car repair when his phone rang with a call from the nursing facility. His mother's doctor spoke in the careful tones reserved for bad news, delivered gently. Pneumonia, admitted to the hospital, stable but serious. And could he come as soon as possible? He made it to the hospital in 20 minutes, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, his mind cataloging everything that needed to be rearranged, classes, shifts, Danny's pickup from school. His mother looked small in the hospital bed, oxygen tubes and IV lines turning her into something fragile and temporary. She was sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady, and the doctor explained treatment plans and timelines with professional compassion that did nothing to ease the fear settling in Evan's chest. She'll need someone with her, the doctor said, at least for the first 48 hours. Family, if possible. I'll be here. The words came automatically, though his mind was already spinning through logistics. He'd have to call in sick to work, miss classes, figure out coverage for Danny. Mrs. Chen could help, but not indefinitely. Everything was about to get complicated again. The careful balance he'd built threatened to collapse under the weight of crisis. He texted Miranda without thinking about it, his fingers moving before his brain could override. My mother's in the hospital, pneumonia. I'm going to be here a while. Her response came within minutes. Which hospital? I'm coming. You don't have to do that, he typed, even as relief flooded through him. I know, but I'm coming anyway. Send me the address. She arrived an hour later, still dressed in what was clearly a business suit, her hair pulled back severely, looking every inch the CEO except for the worry in her eyes. She found him in the waiting room during one of his mother's tests, sitting with cold coffee and the kind of exhaustion that comes from fear rather than sleeplessness. Hey, she said quietly, sliding into the chair beside him. How is she? Stable. They're running more tests. He couldn't quite look at her, afraid that meeting her eyes would break whatever composure he was maintaining. You didn't have to come. I know you're busy. Evan. She waited until he looked at her. Where else would I be? The simple question undid something in his chest. He'd spent so long handling everything alone, being the strong one, the reliable one, the person everyone else leaned on. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone show up just because he needed them. Thank you, he managed, for being here. Always. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Tell me what you need. What can I do? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. He rubbed his free hand over his face, trying to organize thoughts that kept scattering. I need to pick up Danny from school in 3 hours. I need to cover my shifts at work. I need to not fall apart when my mother wakes up and doesn't remember who I am. Model. Miranda was quiet for a moment, and he could almost see her brain working, organizing, solving problems the way she'd built an empire by breaking impossible tasks into manageable pieces. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to sit with your mother while you pick up Danny. Then you're both going to come back here because she's his grandmother and he deserves to see her. I'll stay as long as you need backup. Miranda, you can't just cancel your day. I own the company, Evan. I can do whatever I want. She said it without arrogance, just stating fact. Besides, Catherine's been telling me I work too much. This is me taking her advice. What about your meetings? Your obligations? I have a phone and a laptop. Anything urgent I can handle from here. Anything not urgent can wait. She squeezed his hand. Let me help, please. He wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain his independence. Wanted to prove he could handle this alone the way he'd handled everything else. But he was tired. bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with years of carrying weight without relief. And Miranda was here, solid and certain, offering help without pity or judgment. "Okay," he said finally. "Thank you." His mother woke up 20 minutes later, groggy from medication but lucid. She looked at Evan with clear recognition that made his throat tight with relief. "You came?" she said, her voice raspy from the oxygen. "Of course I came, Mom. Where else would I be?" He took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck made of exhaustion." She tried to smile, but it came out weak. "Don't look so worried. I'm too stubborn to go anywhere yet." "Good. Because Danny would never forgive me if something happened to his favorite grandmother. I'm his only grandmother." But the correction carried affection. Her eyes drifted to Miranda, standing respectfully near the door, and curiosity sharpened her expression. "And who's this?" "Mom, this is Miranda. She's a friend." The label felt inadequate, but sufficient for now. A friend who shows up at hospitals. His mother's gaze was knowing despite the illness. Those are the best kind of friends. Miranda stepped forward, her corporate polish somehow softening into something warmer. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Brooks. I've heard wonderful things about you." "Well, you can't believe all of them." His mother tried for levity, but started coughing, a rattling sound that had the nurse appearing immediately to check vitals and adjust oxygen. Evan stepped back to give the medical staff room, and Miranda moved with him, a silent presence at his shoulder. When the nurse finally left with assurances that everything was stable, his mother was drifting back to sleep, and Evan found himself alone in the hallway with Miranda, his careful composure finally cracking. "I can't lose her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet. Danny needs her. I need her. She's supposed to get better. Supposed to have more time." Miranda pulled him into a hug without asking permission, and he let himself lean into her, let himself be held, while fear and exhaustion leaked out in shaky breaths he wouldn't dignify by calling tears. She didn't offer empty reassurances or false promises. She just held him, solid and warm, until he could breathe normally again. "I'm sorry," he said eventually, pulling back and wiping his face. "I don't usually fall apart like that." "You're not falling apart. You're being human in an impossible situation." She kept one hand on his arm, grounding. "And you don't have to apologize for feeling things. I should be stronger than this." "Why?" Her eyes were steady on his. "Because you're always the strong one? Because everyone depends on you, so you're not allowed to need support?" She said it gently but firmly. "That's not strength, Evan. That's just exhaustion wearing a brave mask." He wanted to argue, but the words dried up because she was right. He'd been the strong one for so long that he'd forgotten strong people needed help too, that asking for support wasn't the same as failing. "I need to get Danny," he said instead, checking his phone. "School lets out in 45 minutes. Go. I'll stay with your mother." "You don't have to. I'll just sit here and work on my laptop. If anything changes, I'll call immediately. But she shouldn't be alone, and you need to take care of your son." "You're sure?" "Completely." She kissed his cheek, quick and reassuring. "Go be dad. I've got mom duty covered." The casual way she said it, mom duty, hit him unexpectedly hard. This was what partnership looked like, he realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but someone showing up in a hospital and staying so he could pick up his kid from school. Someone who saw what needed doing and did it without needing credit or recognition. He picked up Danny from school, explaining about Grandma in careful terms that acknowledged the seriousness without terrifying a 7-year-old. Danny took it with the resilience of children who'd already learned that life didn't always cooperate with what you wanted. His main concern whether Grandma would be okay and whether they could visit her. They stopped home long enough for Danny to grab the drawing he'd made that morning, a dinosaur family complete with labels and careful coloring, then headed back to the hospital. Evan texted Miranda as they parked. "Coming up with Danny. Fair warning, he's going to have questions." "Bring them on," she replied. "I like curious kids." He found her exactly where he'd left her, laptop balanced on her knees, phone pressed to her ear as she conducted what sounded like a board meeting from a hospital chair. She held up one finger when she saw them, wrapping up with efficient authority before ending the call. "Sorry about that. Quarterly projections wait for no one." She stood, closing her laptop, and her attention shifted completely to Danny with an ease that surprised Evan. "You must be Danny. I'm Miranda." Danny, who'd been uncharacteristically shy, studied her with the serious assessment of a child deciding whether an adult was trustworthy. "You're the friend who came to help with Grandma." "That's right. Your dad was worried about her, and I wanted to make sure he wasn't alone." "That's nice." Danny considered this, then held out his drawing. "I made this for Grandma. Do you think she'll like it?" Miranda took the picture with appropriate reverence, examining it like it was fine art. "This is spectacular. Is that a whole family of stegosauruses?" "Stegosauri?" She corrected herself with a tiny smile. "Stegosauri," Danny said automatically. "That's the proper plural. And yes, that's the mom, dad, and 3 babies. I did research." "I can tell. The detail is impressive." She handed it back carefully. "She's going to love this." They went into his mother's room together, Danny climbing carefully onto the bed to show his grandmother the drawing. She woke enough to admire it properly, to tell him it was the best dinosaur family she'd ever seen, to make him promise to keep being good for his dad. Miranda hung back, giving them space but staying close enough to help if needed. Watching her with his family, patient with Danny's chatter, gentle with his mother's frailty, supporting Evan without taking over, something shifted in his chest. This wasn't just attraction anymore, wasn't just the excitement of a new relationship. This was something deeper, something that looked dangerously like love taking root. They stayed until visiting hours ended, Danny falling asleep with his head on Evan's shoulder, while Miranda handled work emails on her phone with one hand and held Evan's hand with the other. When a nurse finally suggested they go home and rest, promising to call if anything changed overnight, Evan felt the resistance of wanting to stay war, with the exhaustion of knowing he needed sleep. "Come on," Miranda said quietly. "You need rest. She'll be here in the morning." They walked to the parking garage together, Danny heavy and warm against Evan's chest, dead to the world in the way only exhausted children can manage. At Miranda's car, he finally put his son down, the boy immediately clinging to his leg like a sleepy koala. "Thank you," Evan said. The words inadequate for everything she'd done that day, for showing up, for staying, for being exactly what we needed. "You don't have to thank me for caring about you." She touched his face gently, thumb brushing his cheekbone. "That's what people do when they—" She stopped, the sentence hanging unfinished. "When they what?" His heart was suddenly loud in his ears. "When they matter to each other." She finished it safely, but her eyes held something bigger. Something neither of them was quite ready to say out loud. "You matter," he said quietly. "More than I expected, more than I'm prepared for." "Good, because you matter to me too." She kissed him softly, carefully, aware of his sleeping son but needing the contact anyway. "Text me when you get home, and in the morning. And honestly, whenever you need anything." "That's a lot of texting." "I can handle it." She ruffled Danny's curls gently. "Take care of each other. I'll see you tomorrow." He watched her drive away, then looked down at his sleeping son. "What do you think, buddy? Is she a keeper?" Danny mumbled something unintelligible and burrowed deeper into Evan's leg. Evan took that as approval and headed to his own car, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy blanket. The next 2 days passed in a blur of hospital visits, work shifts he couldn't afford to miss, and juggling Danny's care with his mother's needs. Miranda showed up every day, bringing coffee and food and a steady presence that kept him grounded. She charmed the nurses, entertained Danny with stories about disastrous business meetings, and sat with his mother during the long stretches when all there was to do was wait. On the 3rd day, when the doctor declared his mother stable enough to return to the nursing facility, Evan felt relief and guilt in equal measure. Relief that she was recovering, guilt that he was grateful to have his life returned to manageable chaos. Miranda found him in the parking lot after everything was settled, leaning against his car and staring at nothing in particular. "Hey," she said softly, "you okay?" "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow when I've slept more than 4 hours. He rubbed his face, scruff rough under his palm. "I keep thinking about what the doctor said, that this is the pattern now. She'll have episodes, recover, have another episode, each one taking a little more until you lose her," Miranda finished what he couldn't say. "I'm sorry, that's impossibly hard. The worst part is that I'm already grieving someone who's still here. Already mourning the mother I'm losing piece by piece instead of being grateful for the time we have left." His voice cracked. "What kind of son does that make me?" "The human kind. She moved in front of him, taking his face in both hands and forcing him to meet her eyes. You're allowed to grieve what you're losing while loving what remains. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. You're not failing her by being sad. How are you so good at this? At knowing exactly what to say? I'm not good at it. I'm just honest about how hard things are. She dropped her hands but stayed close. And I care about you, which makes it easier to find the right words. They stood like that for a long moment. The hospital parking lot carrying on around them, ambulances arriving, families leaving, the constant churn of crisis and recovery that defined these places. Finally, Evan straightened, decision crystallizing. Come to dinner tomorrow night at my place. I want you to meet Danny properly. Not in a hospital, not in passing. Actually meet him. Miranda's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm sure. You've spent 3 days helping with my family crisis. You've met my mother, charmed my son while he was half asleep. And you didn't run screaming when faced with the reality of my life. If you're still here after all that, then I want you to actually be here. No more keeping you separate. Okay. Her smile was uncertain and hopeful at once. What time? 6. I'll cook. Danny insists we have dinosaur nuggets on Fridays, so don't expect anything fancy. Dinosaur nuggets sound perfect. She kissed him, soft and lingering. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for staying. The next evening, Evan cleaned his apartment with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for job interviews. He knew intellectually that Miranda had seen worse. She'd spent 3 days in a hospital, had witnessed his life at its most chaotic. But inviting her into his home felt different, more vulnerable, more real. Danny, for his part, vibrated with barely contained excitement once Evan explained that his friend Miranda was coming for dinner. The pretty lady from the hospital? The one who knew about Stegosauri? That's the one. And buddy, I need you to be cool, okay? No interrogating her about whether she's going to be your mom. I'm 7, not stupid. Danny rolled his eyes with impressive attitude. But can I show her my dinosaur collection? After dinner, if she asks. Evan gave his son a serious look. And remember, just because she's coming to dinner doesn't mean anything's decided. We're taking things slow. Dad. Danny's expression was patient, almost pitying. You've been different for weeks, happy different. That's because of her. I know things. His son's perceptiveness was simultaneously impressive and terrifying. Okay, wise guy, set the table. Miranda arrived exactly at 6, dressed down in jeans and a soft sweater, carrying a bag that clinked suspiciously. I brought wine for us, and apple juice for Danny, and cookies from that bakery you mentioned. Hope that's okay. It's perfect. Evan accepted the bag, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Come in. Warning, my apartment is small and old and nothing like what you're used to. Good. I like small and old. She stepped inside, taking in the space with genuine interest rather than judgment. The apartment was small, living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, bathroom, but it was clean and filled with signs of life. Danny's drawings covered the fridge, many of them featuring dinosaurs in improbable situations. Books overflowed their shelves. A framed photo on the wall showed a black family, Evan, younger and less tired, holding a tiny brown baby wrapped in a hospital blanket, his mother beside him, proud and radiant. Other photos documented the two of them through the years, Danny missing his front teeth, Danny in a dinosaur costume, Danny on Evan's shoulders at a street fair. Hi, Miranda. Danny appeared from his room, suddenly shy now that the moment was here. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having me. She crouched down to his level, not forcing closeness but making herself accessible. Your dad tells me you're the dinosaur expert around here. I know a lot about them. The qualifier was careful, the words of a kid who'd learned not to brag. I'm still learning, though. The best experts are always still learning. That's how you know they're real experts. She straightened, following Evan into the kitchen. Can I help with anything? They worked together with surprising ease, Miranda setting the table while Evan finished cooking, Danny providing running commentary on his day at school, and the fact that Marcus in his class thought velociraptors were bigger than they actually were and needed education. The normalcy of it, the 3 of them moving around each other in the small kitchen, the smell of garlic bread and marinara, Danny's chatter filling the space, felt both wonderful and terrifying. This was what family looked like. And Evan was letting himself imagine it might be real. Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Danny asked Miranda approximately 700 questions, ranging from, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" to, "Do you think money is weird?" to, "If you could have any superpower but only on Tuesdays, what would it be?" Miranda answered each question with genuine thought, never condescending, treating his 7-year-old logic with the same seriousness she probably gave board meetings. "I think money is extremely weird," she told him, dipping a dinosaur nugget in ketchup with the solemnity the moment required. "We all agree these paper rectangles have value, and that agreement only works if everyone keeps believing it. It's like mass delusion we all participate in." Danny considered this, impressed. "That is weird. Dad, did you know money is mass delusion?" "I had my suspicions." Evan caught Miranda's eye across the table, something warm passing between them. She got it. Got Danny. Got the weird, wonderful logic of 7-year-olds. Got how to be present without trying to be a parent. After dinner, Danny showed Miranda his dinosaur collection as promised, explaining each figure with the detailed knowledge of someone who'd studied extensively. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention, not just humoring a child. "This one's a Pachycephalosaurus," Danny explained, holding up a figure with a distinctive domed head. They used to think these guys headbutted each other, but now scientists think the bone was too fragile for that. So maybe they just showed off their heads instead of fighting. "Smart! Why risk injury when you can just look impressive?" Miranda glanced at Evan. "Sound like anyone you know?" He laughed despite himself. "I'm choosing not to answer that." Eventually, Danny's bedtime arrived, and Evan went through the ritual, teeth brushing, pajamas, 3 stories, because Danny negotiated up from 2. When he returned to the living room, he found Miranda standing by the bookshelf, examining the photos there with careful attention. "He's beautiful," she said quietly, pointing to a picture of Danny at maybe 4 years old, gap-toothed and grinning at the camera, curls wild, brown skin glowing with summer sun. "You were both so young." 25 felt like a kid raising a kid. Evan moved to stand beside her, but we figured it out, mostly. "You did more than figure it out. You built something real." She turned to face him fully. "He's confident and curious and kind. That's all you, Evan. That's you being an incredible father. It's terrifying how much I love him. How much power he has to hurt me just by being hurt himself." The admission came easier now, after days of letting her see his vulnerability. "Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night just to make sure he's still breathing. That's love." She touched his chest right over his heart, the scary, overwhelming, would die for them kind. "It's beautiful." They stood close in the dim living room, the apartment quiet now, except for the ambient noise of life, plumbing in walls, neighbors through thin floors, the city humming outside. Evan pulled her closer, his arms around her waist, her hands settling on his shoulders. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly, "for being so good with him, for not trying too hard or pretending to be something you're not. I like him, genuinely." She smiled. "He's smart and funny and clearly adores you. How could I not like him? Still, it means something that you showed up and stayed and didn't get scared by the reality of what dating me actually looks like." "Evan," she said his name like a gentle correction. "I'm not scared of dinosaur nuggets and bedtime stories. I'm scared of this ending before we figure out what it could be." "What do you want it to be?" The question was quiet but crucial, demanding honesty neither of them had quite articulated yet. "I want it to be real. Not just exciting or interesting or different from my usual life. Actually real. With complications and difficulties and all the messy human stuff that comes with caring about someone." She met his eyes, fearless. "I want you, Evan, not for 5 minutes. Not until the novelty wears off. Just you. For as long as you'll let me stay." His heart was thunder in his chest, loud and insistent. "That's terrifying to hear." "Why?" "Because I want that too. And wanting it means I can lose it." The fear came out raw, unpolished. "I'm falling for you, Miranda, hard and fast and completely inconvenient. And that scares the hell out of me, because you could destroy me. You could walk into my life, let me imagine a future, let Danny start to love you, and then decide it's too hard or too complicated or not worth the effort. And I'd have to watch my son lose another person. And I don't know if I can survive being that wrong about someone again. I'm not Rachel." She said it fiercely, no hesitation. "I'm not going to get scared and leave. I'm not going to give up when things get hard. That's not who I am. You say that now. I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it until you believe me. She framed his face with both hands. I love you, Evan Brooks. I'm in love with you. With your stubbornness and your fear and your fierce protection of your son. I'm in love with the man who works 3 jobs and goes to night school and still finds time to make dinosaur-shaped pancakes. I'm in love with you, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave. The words landed like a physical force, knocking the breath from his lungs. No one had said those words to him in years, not since Rachel, not since before everything fell apart. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be loved, to be chosen, to be someone's first priority instead of their backup plan. I love you too. The words came out rough, scraped raw by years of not saying them. I didn't want to, I tried not to, but I love you, and I'm terrified that loving you means losing you. Then we'll be terrified together. She kissed him, deep and demanding, and he kissed her back with years of lonely nights and careful walls finally crumbling. They kissed like people who'd found something rare and weren't willing to let it go easily. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Miranda rested her forehead against his. So what now? Now we try. Really try. No more holding back. No more protecting myself by keeping you at a distance. We do this for real, knowing it might hurt, betting on each other anyway. I like those odds. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But I need you to promise me something. What? If you get scared, if you start spiraling into catastrophizing about all the ways this could end, talk to me. Let me in instead of pushing me away. Can you do that? It would be hard. Every instinct screaming to protect himself by retreating. But she deserved that trust. Deserved the chance to prove she meant what she said. I can try. That's the best I can promise. Trying is enough. She kissed him again, softer this time. I should go. You need sleep, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. He walked her to the door, reluctant to let the evening end. Miranda? Yeah? Thank you for saying it first. For being braver than me. We take turns being brave. That's how this works. She smiled, touching his face one more time. I'll text you tomorrow. After she left, Evans stood in his quiet apartment, his lips still tingling from her kiss. His chest full of something that felt like hope and terror in equal measure. He checked on Danny one more time, still sleeping, still safe, and then collapsed into his own bed, exhausted and exhilarated at once. His phone buzzed with a text. Thank you for letting me meet Danny. He's wonderful. You're wonderful. I meant everything I said. He smiled, typing back. I meant it to. All of it. Good, she replied, because I'm not giving up on us, even when you get scared. Especially when I get scared, he corrected. Especially then, she agreed. He fell asleep with his phone still in his hand, Miranda's words replaying in his mind. She loved him, had said it first without hesitation, staking her claim before he'd had the courage to stake his. And she'd promised to stay, promised to work through the fear and complication and messy reality of loving someone with a complicated life. The 5-minute bet had been lost weeks ago, but neither of them had admitted it until they'd blown past curiosity and into something real, something that couldn't be measured in minutes or controlled by careful planning. They'd fallen, and now they had to trust that the landing wouldn't destroy them both. It was the scariest thing Evan had done in years, and for the first time since Rachel left, he thought maybe the risk might be worth it. The morning after Miranda's confession arrived with November rain and an email that would change everything. Evan was making coffee when his phone lit up with a message from the nursing facility. The subject line was clinical and devastating, regarding Ellen Brooks' financial review required. He opened it with hands that already knew to shake, reading words that blurred together into one essential meaning. His mother's care was draining his resources faster than anticipated. The facility needed updated insurance information, and there were outstanding balances that required immediate attention. The numbers at the bottom of the email were staggering, even though he'd known they were coming eventually. Medical debt had a way of accumulating silently until suddenly it was drowning you. Danny appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Dad, you okay? Evan forced a smile, locking his phone and pushing the panic down where his son couldn't see it. Yeah, buddy, just work stuff. You want pancakes? Always. Danny climbed onto a kitchen chair, watching his father with the too perceptive gaze of a child who'd learned early to read adult moods. Is Grandma okay? Grandma's fine. This is different stuff. Boring adult stuff. Evan pulled out the pancake mix, grateful for the routine that gave his hands something to do. What shape today? Triceratops, obviously. They fell into their Saturday morning ritual, but Evan's mind was elsewhere, calculating numbers that didn't add up no matter how he arranged them. He could pick up more shifts, drop a class to free up time for work, maybe sell his car and rely on public transit. But even as he ran through options, he knew the math was unforgiving. He was already stretched beyond reasonable limits. His phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Good morning. Coffee later? I miss your face." He stared at the message, guilt and longing warring in his chest. She'd told him she loved him less than 12 hours ago, and already he was facing a crisis that would test whether she meant it. Because this was the reality of loving him. It came with medical debt and impossible choices and problems that money could solve, but pride made complicated. Can't today. Rain check, he typed back, the lie sitting heavy even as he sent it. Her response was immediate. Everything okay? Fine, just busy. Talk later. The dots appeared and disappeared several times before her reply came through. Okay, call if you need anything. He wouldn't call. Couldn't call. Because the thing he needed was money, and asking her for money would make this relationship exactly what he'd feared from the beginning. Transactional, imbalanced, her as benefactor and him as charity case. He'd rather drown than become someone who dated a billionaire for financial security. The weekend passed in a fog of work and worry. Evan picked up extra shifts at the bar, staying late to clean after closing for the overtime pay. He researched loan options during breaks, running numbers that all led to the same conclusion. He was going to have to make hard choices about his mother's care. Miranda texted throughout the weekend, her messages growing more concerned as his responses became shorter and less frequent. By Sunday night, she'd stopped pretending everything was normal. "Evan, you're shutting me out. Whatever's wrong, let me help." "Nothing's wrong," he lied. "Just tired. Busy week." "Don't do this. Don't pull away because you're scared." He stared at her message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. She was right. He was pulling away, retreating into the defensive isolation that had protected him for years. But letting her in meant admitting he couldn't handle this alone, meant accepting help that would fundamentally change the power dynamic between them. "I'm fine," he typed. "Promise. Just need some space to handle some things." The response took longer this time. "Okay, but I'm here when you're ready to stop handling things alone." Monday morning brought a registered letter from the nursing facility, official language demanding payment arrangements within 30 days or alternative care options would need to be discussed. Alternative care options, the polite way of saying they'd have to move his mother somewhere cheaper, somewhere that wouldn't provide the level of care she needed. Evan sat in his car in the parking lot of his day job, the letter heavy in his hands, and felt the walls closing in. He'd spent years building a life that worked, carefully balancing impossible demands. And now it was all coming apart because he dared to imagine something more. His phone rang with Miranda's name and he let it go to voicemail. Then she called again and again. On the fourth call, he finally answered, his voice coming out rougher than intended. "Hey, don't hey me like everything's fine." Her voice was tight with worry and frustration. "You've been avoiding me for 3 days. Something's wrong and you're shutting me out instead of letting me help. What happened to trying? To letting me in when you get scared?" "I'm not scared. I'm just dealing with some things." "Evan." She said his name like a reprimand and a plea. "I told you I love you. I meant it. But love doesn't work if you disappear every time something gets hard." "It's not." He stopped, the lie dying on his tongue. She deserved better than his careful evasions. "It's money. My mother's care. The bills are more than I can handle, and I need to figure out how to manage it without asking me for help," she finished quietly, understanding clicking into place. "You're pulling away because you're afraid I'll think you're using me, aren't you?" "Aren't I? If I let you help with this, if I accept money from you, how is that different from what you expected? How is that different from every other person in your life who wants something from you? Because you're not asking, you're avoiding. Because you'd rather struggle alone than risk me thinking badly of you. Because you're choosing pride over partnership." Her voice softened. "Evan, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Helping with medical bills wouldn't even register as an expense to me, but it would make a real difference in your life, in your mother's care. Why is letting me help so impossible? Because it changes everything. The admission came out raw. Because once you start paying for things, I become someone who needs you financially. And then how do I know if you're staying? Because you love me or because you feel responsible for me? How do you know I'm not staying because I need the financial security? Miranda was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she'd thought about this before. When my father died, he left me $30 million and a company worth 10 times that. Do you know how many people suddenly became my friends? How many distant relatives appeared? How many men suddenly found me fascinating? She took a breath. I learned to recognize users, people who saw me as an ATM with legs. And Evan, you're not one of them. You turned me down twice before agreeing to dinner. You've insisted on splitting bills. You work yourself to exhaustion rather than ask for help. If you were using me, you'd be doing the opposite of everything you're actually doing. Or I'm just playing a longer game, building trust before asking for the real money. But you don't believe that, and neither do I. She sighed, frustration bleeding through. But I can't force you to accept help. I can't make you believe that my money doesn't have to change what we are to each other. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you space to figure this out. But Evan, if you let pride destroy what we're building, if you choose struggling alone over trusting me, that's going to break my heart. Not because you didn't take my money, but because you didn't trust my love. The call ended and Evan sat in the silence of his car, her words echoing in the empty space. She was right. He knew she was right. But knowing and doing were separated by years of learning that accepting help meant owing something. That debt always came due. That depending on someone gave them power to hurt you. He went through the motions of his day, serving coffee to students who complained about assignments and professors, his mind elsewhere. That evening, he picked up Danny from after-school care and found his son unusually quiet during dinner. "You're sad about Miranda," Danny said finally, pushing pasta around his plate without eating. "Did you guys break up?" "No. We're just figuring some things out." Evan set down his fork, giving his son full attention. "Why would you think we broke up?" "Because you looked the way you looked after Mom left. All quiet and trying to pretend you're okay." Danny's eyes were too old for 7, carrying wisdom earned through loss. "Are you going to tell her to go away like you told Mom it was okay to leave?" The question hit like a physical blow. "Buddy, that was completely different. Your mom left because she wasn't ready to be a mother. Miranda and I are just dealing with adult stuff." "But you're pushing her away, I can tell." Danny's voice got small, scared in a way that made Evan's chest ache. "Is it because of me? Because if she stays, she has to deal with me too?" "No!" Evan moved around the table, pulling his son into a fierce hug. "Danny, listen to me. You are never the problem. You are the best thing in my entire life. If Miranda can't handle you, that's her loss, not yours. Understand? Then why are you sad?" How did he explain this to a 7-year-old? How did he articulate pride and fear and the complicated mathematics of accepting help from someone who could afford to give it? Sometimes grown-ups have problems that money could fix. And sometimes accepting that money feels scary because we're worried about what it means. He pulled back, looking at his son's serious face. "Miranda has lots of money, and she likes you. So if she can help, why won't you let her? Because I'm afraid that if she helps, it'll change how she sees me, or how I see myself." Evan swallowed. "I know that probably doesn't make sense." "It makes sense. You're scared." Danny considered this with the gravity of someone working through a complex problem. "But Dad, you always tell me that being scared is okay, as long as I don't let it stop me from doing important things." He tilted his head. "Is Miranda important?" "Yeah, buddy." Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. "She's really important." "Then maybe you should be brave even though you're scared." Danny said it like it was obvious, like fear and courage could coexist without contradiction. Evan held his son close, marveling at how children could cut through complexity to reach simple truth. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't always listen." But Danny was smiling now, and the tension that had hung over dinner finally broke. That night, after Danny was asleep, Evan sat with the nursing facility letter and his bank statements, forcing himself to look at the numbers without flinching. The math was brutal, but clear. He could manage another 3 months, maybe 4 if he dropped to 1 class per semester and picked up weekend shifts. But that was buying time, not solving the problem. Eventually, something would have to give. His phone showed 6 missed texts from Miranda, messages that tracked from concern to hurt to finally just a simple statement. I'm not giving up on you, but you have to meet me halfway. He stared at the message for a long time, Danny's words echoing in his head. Be brave even though you're scared. Let important people in instead of pushing them away. Simple wisdom from a 7-year-old who'd already learned that love meant risk. Evan opened a new message, his thumbs hovering over the keyboard as he tried to find words.